Hi there, and welcome to the next video in the series looking at the flight simulator using Axis and Ohs. It says that it's based on the honeycomb, yoke and throttle quadrant, but it's not really this one. It was kind of triggered by me buying the honeycomb, yoke and throttle quadrant, but it's really about the X-Touch and using layers in Axis and Ohs. When I got the throttle quadrant, it's got lots of the autopilot functions and a few other things that I had allocated on my X-Touch MIDI controller, and it made me rethink what I'm going to use it, how I'm going to use it. There's duplication, so there's tidying up to do on the X-Touch, and it made me investigate a bit further into some of the more advanced or certainly less used functions in Axis and Ohs, and that's the layers option. So and I call it part one because there's a couple of different things to do, but we'll break it up into different parts. What I thought I'd do first of all, if you haven't seen some of my previous videos, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the X-Touch controller, so you understand what that's about. So if I bring that controller up here, put my camera on it, and don't knock it over, you can see how big it is. It's a small, and it's designed really for musical instruments, so working with Cubase or something like that. But it works really well with the flight simulator. It gives us 8 different rotary controllers, and these work infinite turns. It doesn't stop at any point. You can turn it as far as you like, and it works. Other manufacturers have a stop at say 360 degrees, or even some are smaller, so you can't keep on rotating them, but this one you can keep rotating. So you've got 8 of those, so that gives us quite a few control knobs for radios and stuff like that, and each one has a push switch built into it as well. So we've got 8 switches on here that we can program, and another 16 at the bottom here. These are push switches, but you can program them to be toggles or whatever you need them to be. Also, it's got this switch between layers, layer A and layer B. So if you go into layer B mode, this is all blanked out now, and again we can allocate functions to the a second function to everything on here. So it's like having 2 X-Touch minis together. So plenty of buttons and control and encoders to play with. So that's the X-Touch Mini. What I do is, because there's far too many buttons and things to remember what you've got, so I make these paper sort of overlays to stick on. They're just on card and printed out on I've got an A3 printer and then cut out, but it reminds me, it tells me what all the functions do, because I can't remember otherwise. So that's the device, and if we just turn that camera off, so that's the layout that I've got for my Cessna, well, the 172 at the moment. And this is the radio, so nav radio, megahertz and kilohertz on separate rotaries at the moment. If you look into the cockpit, again they are separate rotaries, but they're stacked on top of one another, but they are separate. So I've used 2 separate rotaries here, and we'll come to that in a bit. But these are the parts here that are already available to me on the honeycomb, on the throttle quadrant. So setting the heading direction, I don't need that. That's already on there, so I can take that away. Setting the altitude, the desired altitude for the or the altitude to be held, so those can go. Setting the course, that's on the rotary, that can go. Most of the other stuff has to stay here. That there's no simulation of the radios on there, so that can go. But toggling the autopilot on and off, setting in heading mode, nav mode, approach mode, FLC, the flight level change mode, that's there, and equally the rotary on the yoke allows us to adjust the desired airspeed. That's how, if you haven't used the FLC, that's how it works. You set an speed that it will try and maintain, and it will do the best rate of climb that it can at that speed that you give it, depending on how you set the throttle, of course. So if you haven't done FLC, it's worth having a look at that, but those can go. This one here is a little cheat that I've put in on mine, so that when I put it into FLC mode, it also puts in the actual airspeed, the best rate of climb airspeed, to save me having to fiddle it with a knob to put it in. So it just puts it in straight away for me. I quite like it, so I might keep that. And it's kind of like this cheat here. I think it's a bit of a cheat, really, anyway. If you look at the cockpit, it's built into the Microsoft thing, so pushing here, and it will synchronize that heading bug with the heading that you're flying on. I don't think it's there in the real world one. I think that's something that Microsoft have added. And I think I quite like it, so I'll probably end up keeping that. What else is there? Well, there's no flight director toggle on the yoke, but there is alt hold. There's no VNav, so that's going to have to stay on my X-Touch. And on here, they've got one called reverse, which I think is the same as the back course, but I haven't tested it yet. So I'm going to keep it on here until I've tested it and decide what I want to do with that. There is vertical speed hold, that's there, and the control to change the vertical speed that you're trying to achieve. So those three can go. So it's getting tidier. We've released a lot of buttons. But equally, when I think about it, I don't use these ATC calls from my X-Touch. I tend to use them from my Stream Deck. Just find it easier. One of the things that's difficult when I've got this layer A and layer B business going on with the X-Touch is deciding what's going to be on layer A, and that's really the things that you need instantly when you're in flight. And layer B are the things that you use rarely or use pre-flight. So they're grouped together in layer B, but it is tricky remembering when you, especially when you're in flight, to switch from layer A to layer B sometimes. So what I'm trying to do is to tidy this up as much as possible. And as I don't use these, those ACT calls can go, and that's really reduced the amount of stuff that's on layer B. And we can go a little bit further with it as well, actually. Looking at the cockpit, remember on the actual G1000, the megahertz and kilohertz are stacked as one button on top of another, and it would be ideal if I could actually achieve that here, so that we stack the nav with megahertz and kilohertz on the same rotary and on the same layer as far as the X-Touch is concerned. So on layer A, I wish they called it bank A rather than layer A. We're going to use layer as a concept in Axis and Ohs, so I don't want to get the two mixed up. So let's call that bank A. That's what I'm going to try and achieve, and that's what we're going to do. That's the kind of meat of today's video, is getting that concept sorted out. On the simulation in the cockpit, it's as it is in the real world. If you click on here, if you press that button there, it swaps from being nav radio 1 to nav radio 2. Previously I had the swap between standby and active for the frequency on this controller here, but now I'm not using that for the nav radio. I'm going to put it down here onto that button there, and that kind of matches quite nicely to how it's laid out on the G1000. So we'll try the same concept with the COM. We'll bring the COM radio over here and we'll stack the megahertz and kilohertz on top of each other, bring across the swap between COM1 and COM2, and put the swap between standby and active down here. Tidied up even more stuff, looking good. What about if we did the same trick with the MDF inner and outer button and the PFD? So it should be MFD, not MDF. Something totally different. The the PFD. If we do the same trick and stack those onto the same controller, we've pulled quite a bit away from layer 2, and in fact, look at this, the layer B, bank B, we can pull all those up right out of the way. So all we're left with now is these ones here, and they deserve to be brought up to layer A as well, because I use them with these, and if I'm in layer A to activate these, I need to be in layer A realistically to activate those. So now I've really tidied things up. I've got that down to one layer. Just a question now of laying this last bit out logically. So these are the functions that are on the autopilot, which aren't or possibly not simulated by the honeycomb. So I'm going to bring those up to here, and these two cheats of mine will bring them down. So that's where we're getting to. That's what we're aiming to do. So the bulk of this, the rest of this video now is going to be looking at this technique here to get the megahertz and kilohertz both operating on the same rotary. So to do that, we need to be in the cockpit, and we need Axis and Ohs over to do the work. And I'm going to put my camera top right so you can see when I turn things, when I touch things, you can see exactly what I'm doing there. So the first thing to do is, if you haven't seen how you allocate functions to switches, I'll just go through that quickly so you see how that's done. So I'm going to add a new button, and although it's a rotary, it's effectively a button, and we're looking for the key down event. And I'm going to apply a filter to it. I want to filter to find the functions for the G1000. So if I go for 1000 and apply the filter, you'll see it finds it in a couple of places, and it finds the G1000. And although there's a lot in here, it's the soft keys, buttons, and a few of the rotaries, but not the ones I want to control the radios. They are actually in here in the HTML variables, and it's not the MFD. I'm going to do the PFD. Although the MFD and the PFD are sort of slaved together, I'm only going to program the PFD ones. And there's the COM radios, and here's the nav radios. So the filter I'm going to use is the 1000, the PFD, and the nav. So if I apply that filter, it just picks up the HTML variables and just a small selection, just exactly what we need. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to program the large button, which would be the outer button, and that's the megahertz of the frequency. So I'm programming that in onto this end rotary here. So to identify it, says what's the device and which button, and we just identify it by turning the knob. And if I turn it just one click, you'll see that it's detected it's coming from my X-Touch Mini, and it's the controller is the one with the number 3001, and I've clicked it it doesn't. It knows I used it, but it doesn't know which way I turn it until it gets the second click in the same direction. So you could turn it more than 2 clicks. You don't have to be accurate, but it must be more than one. If you just turn it once, it doesn't know which way you've turned it. So it now knows which way I've turned it, and we can add that to the assignment. And that's done. So now if I turn that knob, you should see that green light come on. If you haven't got that layout, by the way, there's 3 different layouts that you can put. This one here, which is the full information. This one here is quite sparse, and this one here, sort of a midway house. So we've got the green button there, and you should see this number here, the megahertz, decrease as I turn that, and that's working. You can see everything happening. Of course, the increase won't work. Turning it the other way won't work at the moment because it's not allocated. So we'll just allocate that now. So do this. The filter will still be there, so we can use that filter, and it's going to be the large one, increase, and again just turn it, and it knows it's turned right this time. Add that, and I've now got increase and decrease. So that's the sort of standard way of allocating it. But now I want to also, on the same rotary, put the kilohertz. And if I just add them as the same here, when I turn it to the left, it will detect both the megahertz and the kilohertz and adjust both of them. I don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do is I want to change this so that the megahertz only works sometimes and the kilohertz only works sometimes. And that's done with this bit here, the layer. If I click on here, it says default layer at the moment. If I press there, there's layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and back to default again. So the concept is that anything that's in grey is in the default layer, layer 0, and that means that will fire. Doesn't matter what layer you're on here. If I'm on layer 1, that will still fire because it's in the default layer. But if I put it into layer 1, if I put that back to the default layer now, when I turn that, it doesn't happen. It only happens when it's on layer 1. When it's on layer 1, it's now working. If I move it to layer 2, it's not working. So what I want to do is to put the kilohertz onto layer 2. So nice and easy. Filter out, and it's the small one, that's the kilohertz, and this is the decrease. So I'm going to turn the same knob in the same direction as before. So it's detected it's 3001, it's detected it's turned left, but I'm allocating it to layer 2 and click on add. Now don't worry if you forget to put the layer on it, you can always allocate the layer and change layers by clicking there. So let's put that into layer 2, and we'll do the increase one. So again, using that filter, it's the small but increase. Again, same controller, turn to the right, so it's a clockwise turn, drop it into layer 2, click add, and the job's done. So we really ought to test that. So in default layer, nothing happening. Turn it to layer 1, and I should see the megahertz, and layer 2 I should see the kilohertz, and it's all working absolutely fine. Might as well finish the job while we're allocating stuff. That we need to allocate what happens when we press on here. That's the one that will swap it between nav 1 and nav 2, and allocate to this button here. We should allocate the swap between standby and active. So again, it's just assigning. The push is the one on the end of the rotary controller, so we'll allocate that, and we'll just click on here and that's detected that. There's the click, and we'll keep that on the default layer because I want that ability no matter what mode I'm in, whether I'm in a megahertz, kilohertz, anything else, it's going to happen. And we'll do exactly the same with the swap from standby to active. So that is the nav switch, and that's going to be on this button here, so we'll press on there, and that is done. Okay, so we've got the functions. What we haven't got is the ability to control the layers without going into Axis and Ohs and clicking on things. So I'm going to write a script which I'm going to allocate to this button here, which will toggle it between layer 1 and layer 2. So we need to do a script, RPN script editor, and I'm going to create a folder, a group. And I'm going to call that my honeycomb scripts. These are my scripts which are for use when I've got my honeycomb working. And add that, close that. So I've now got somewhere that I can put those scripts. So this script I'm going to write is going to go into there. And I'm also going to start my scripts with HC, honeycomb. So this is the honeycomb, and I want it to toggle the layer to go from layer 1 to layer 2 or layer 2 to layer 1. So that's it, that's the title for it. So to do that, I need to find out which layer we're actually on at the moment. So I'm going to put a sim variable into there. We don't need to use a filter here for this because they're in alphabetical order and it's right at the top, so it's easy to find. And I'm looking for this one here, this local variable, which says what the button layer is. There is also an axis layer because you could do the same trick with axes, but we're just concentrating on the buttons. So that's going to read the variable to find out what layer we're on. And what I want to do is to compare that to 1. I want to find out if that is 1. If you've not used the editor before, these dots here are actually the spacebar. When you click a spacebar, it puts a visible mark so you can see that you have actually got a space, because the spaces are critical. So what I want to do is to compare the two and find out if they're equal. Is that equal to 1? And if it is, so we'll put an if command, and then the thing you want it to do, if it is, you put into these curly brackets, into brace, in between braces. And it's good practice to type the open and close braces and then go back and work inside so you can't forget what you're doing. So if it is, if it's 1, I want it to change it to 2. And if it's not, I want you to change it back to 1, if you see what I mean. So we're going to put a sim event in here. And again, quite close to the top, control the layers. And we've got 3 different ways of changing the button layer. And we can make it move down a layer, up a layer, or set it to a specific layer. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set it to a specific layer. So we'll just put that in. And at the moment, it's trying to change it to layer 1. But it's saying if it is in layer 1, well, I don't want to change it to layer 1. I want it to change to layer 2. So layer 2 is going to be sent to this command, and that will change the variable. But I want to do something else as well. I want it, if it's not 1, to make it 1, to swap it to 1. So we put another command here. So it's space else. And there's no E after the else. That is how it should be spelt. Again, we put the curly brackets in the braces. And we're going to put the same command in. So the sim event is the button layer set. And this is the one we do want set to 1. So if it's 1, make it 2. If it's not, we assume it's 2, so put it to 1. And that's how that works. So we'll save that. And now we need to allocate it to that button. So click on here. And if I roll through here, you'll find my honeycomb scripts, and there's my toggle layer. So that's what I wanted to do when I press this button here. And it'd be in the default layer, because again I want it to happen every time, no matter what layer I'm in. So we'll click add. Now it will work. We're in the default layer at the moment, so when I press it the first time, it'll go into layer 1, press it again, and it's gone into layer 2. So once we're in the toggle mode. But it has that thing that when we start the plane, it will start automatically in default layer, which means that if I go straight away to change my frequency, nothing's going to happen until I press this button, which isn't good programming. So there's a couple of little tidy ups we need to do. So what I want to do is to run a script when we load the aircraft to make sure that it's in layer 1. So it's a very simple script. RPN scripts editor, and of course it's going to go into my honeycomb scripts, and I'm going to call it honeycomb set layer 1. So we're going to make sure it sets layer 1. Well, that sim event that we were putting in, butter layer set, that's it. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to straight away at the beginning to set it to 1. So we've got a piece of script to do it. We just need to make it happen now. And what we can do here is we can allocate an aircraft automated script. So it's a script that's automated just for this one aircraft, not global, just for this one aircraft. So when we load it, I want to pick from my scripts, set layer 1, and I want it to happen just once, right at the beginning. When we load the file, I want you to do that. So if I click on add update, and it's happened already, it's just run the script. That's happened. We can be sure that that works if we restart the flight, but I can guarantee that does work. Okay, so when we start the flight, that will flick over to layer 1. So we've now got that ability to press this button and it toggles. The other refinement I'd quite like to make is for this to light up when it's in the non-default mode. It will default to megahertz. So when it's in kilohertz, I'd like it to light that up. So guess what? Another piece of script. And in the RPN scripts editor, we want to know again which layer we're in. Well, we've done that before. We know how to look for that. We are going to look for the button layer, and we're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to compare it to 1. So if it's in 1, then that means it's in the gigahertz mode. So if it's in the if it's in the gigahertz mode, I don't want it to switch the light on, so we're going to ensure that it's switched off. So if it's in 1, the way we write to the LED is sending a 0 via MIDI to that bulb. So it looks a bit confusing to start with, but I'll talk you through it. That is not a mathematical sign, that is an arrow. It is the greater than key, but it's actually saying I'm going to send it to the MIDI. And once it goes to the MIDI, I would like you to make sure it's going to device number 7. Every MIDI device that's plugged into your computer gets given a serial number. So although this is going out, only device number 7 should hear it. So that's where the 7 comes in. And what we're going to send is a command called note on. Remember, it's really a music device. So it thinks that you're sending a note, but you're not. You're just sending a 0. And we're sending it over the global channel and that's every single device is listening on channel 1 for commands, and then it only responds if it's got the right number, if it's a number 7 in my case, and I'll show you where you find that later on. And I want to send it to bulb number 8. The LEDs are labelled 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is that one there. So that's me making sure it turns off if we're in layer 1, but I want it to turn on, so there's an else command if we're in layer 2. So for this one we're going to send a 1. Again, we're going to send it via the MIDI, so it's exactly the same format as before, that we're going to send it out through the MIDI command to device number 7. It's a note on command on channel 1 to bulb number 8. So it's absolutely identical, apart from if we're sending a 0 or sending a 1. Okay, and that's it. That's the script. So that's going to go into my HC scripts, and we'll just call it HC LED, because we could add more to this later and get it to do other tricks with the LED. So we'll save that. And again, we want that script to run. We want it to happen. And we'll again use the aircraft automated scripts for this. And we'll have it repeating. We'll have it constantly looking to see, is it layer 1, is it layer 2? And it will check. All the default is every 100 milliseconds. And we'll add that. That's in there now. So we close that. So if we've got it right, fingers crossed, when I change layers, there it is. The light is on because we're now in kilohertz mode. So I turn this, I should see the kilohertz changing, and I am. If I press it again, we're now in megahertz and the light is off. So, but it works. It's doing what I asked it to do. Everything is based on kind of one channel here, and we've got complete control of that. If I go back to my PowerPoint, I want to do the same idea with the comms radio. So we should be able to do that. Let's go back into the flight simulator, and it should be pretty quick. We know what we're doing here. So we're going to allocate a key down event. We want a slightly different filter, of course. We want it not to be nav, we want it to be com, but it's pretty much the same technique. We'll do the com large. So it's the second rotary here we're turning anti-clockwise, and we'll put that onto layer 1. And the increase, layer 1. And we'll do the small one. Same rotary as before, turning it left. This will be layer 2. And then we'll do the same for the increasing one. Turning it clockwise this time. Layer 2, add. And then the last one we need to do is the push on the top of the rotary. So that's that one there, and this is just that rotary now just being pushed so that it clicks the switch, leaving it in the default layer, and then we need the swap. So there is a long press on here as well. I'll just have a look at that in a second, but let's just do the ordinary switch. So that is going to be this one here, this switch. Leaving that in default and add. If you look at the one here, it's got the switch, but it's also got a long press here, and it says emergency, but I've never seen it actually implemented, so I'm not going to bother implementing it here either. But we'll just test this through now. So we'll go into megahertz, and it's the COM side we should be looking at now over here. So we've got megahertz up, megahertz down. If I change now to kilohertz, up and down, that's working, and I should be able to swap the active and standby on this one here. That's working, and I should be able to swap between COM radio 1 and COM radio 2, so everything's working. There's no need to program this button up here. This one here is setting it into layer 1 or layer 2 for any switch that I've done this technique to. So that's one of the little niggly drawbacks that I've got on this, that if I've used this one and I leave it in kilohertz, as soon as I reach for the comms radio, that'll also be in kilohertz. The whole thing goes together, and the same would happen for the PFD and the MFD. That if I do the inner and outer large and small knobs stacked onto the same controller, then they'll both be in whatever mode, layer 1, layer 2 mode here is. I'm not sure if that's an issue or not. It's something I need to fly and have a go. But in part 2 of the video, I will show you a technique where we can actually control each knob and which mode it's in, so we can actually separate those out and do it individually for each one. Now, one of the things I left hanging is I haven't shown you how you find out the serial number for your MIDI. So it's in the MIDI hardware here, show MIDI devices, and you can see that MIDI in, it's sort of coming in as number 2, but MIDI out, it's going for number 7. So that's the key bit there when we write our MIDI script. That's the important bit. If I double click on one of these, you can see that the input is automatically coming from 2. You kind of almost don't need to know that. If I drop that down, it's not going to appear anywhere else. There's no confusion in that. It's when you write the script, you need to know what number yours is. So you do need to go into the hardware and just check out your MIDI devices and see what it's been allocated to. Okay, I think that's about it. I think that covers everything that I wanted to do. That it shows how I can make my X-Touch Mini more efficient. Everything is now working on this layer A. Nothing is working on layer B. But it is about using the layers here, and again, it's just that there's no connection between the layers on here and the layers on the X-Touch Mini. It's the same word for a similar sort of concept, but I hope you get the idea. And just to reinforce that this idea of layers is not exclusive to the X-Touch. If you've got anything else that is providing switches for you, it's a way of allocating more than one function to a switch. Yeah, so I'll leave you to think about how that applies to you. Okay, so I see you in the next video, and that will be when we look at how we can use a different technique to allow each of these controllers to have their own megahertz, gigahertz or inner outer settings and not interfere with each other. Okay, see you in the next one.